Hey everyone! I'm Albert Boris. Today, we're finally gonna be continuing the video series where we'll be predicting Mario Kart X, the speculated next game in the series. The first part was about retro tracks, and the second part about characters. This time, we're gonna talk about nitro tracks.
Wait, shouldn't part 3 be about items as tradition goes? That's how all the other YouTubers did it.
Yeah, well, I'd rather give priority to the more interesting topic. You see, the new tracks are actually what I'm personally most excited for in the next game. Growing up, I was always more fixated on retro tracks. In fact, I think most people were, and still are. I mean, who doesn't love seeing their favorite tracks returning? But, I don't know, in later years, I've been more curious about how Nintendo could create brand new courses. When it comes to retro tracks, Nintendo are still pretty limited with working with what they have, especially if we're talking something like SNES tracks, but for new tracks, they could go all out, and that is way more interesting than any mere remake. So, you know what? We're almost completely free when it comes to these predictions. Sure, there will still be some guidelines I have to go by. Obviously, we need the obligatory Mario circuit and Rainbow Road and all that, and it all needs to progress from easy to hard, but otherwise, there's not much else I need to mention. So, yeah, with all that being said, let's just get started. First things first is the Mushroom Cup. As tradition goes, this would be the easiest of the Nitro Cups, as it would likely be our first step ever into the game. So these tracks shouldn't be too ambitious, but hopefully they can still stand out in their own right. So opening up the Mushroom Cup is a track I'm calling 1-Circuit. This would be the obligatory starter track, although it would be a bit different from what we're used to, because as the name implies, this would be directly based off of 1-1 from the original Super Mario Bros. Imagine the first Mario level ever made into a racetrack. It could basically be a grassland where you drive up blocks on top of bricks and avoid warp pipes and Goombas, while a remix of the classic overworld theme would play. This is an idea that I'm actually kinda surprised hasn't been done yet. Most of the starter tracks in the series are pretty forgettable to say the least, and I don't just mean in terms of difficulty. But aesthetically, they just look like your typical Formula 1 racetracks with no semblance to any Mario elements at all. So I think it's about time for a change. I think this could possibly end up being one of the most iconic first tracks ever, if it were to happen that is. Next, the second track should be slightly more laid back. How about the track directly based off of Toad Town, using Paper Mario 64's version as a template? It could be a soothing trip through some streets, and maybe you could even drive on top of rooftops for some sections. We're still in the Mushroom Cup, so it shouldn't be too hectic, but I think it could be a fun one. Next, however, we're gonna get a bit more interesting with our third track. So, we don't really have a lot of Rosalina themed tracks, let alone Mario Galaxy ones. The only one we do have is Rosalina's Ice World in Mario Kart 7, and while it's a pretty fun special cup track, it's not that memorable. So how about another one, this time in the Mushroom Cup? Introducing Rosalina Caverns. Imagine a pretty easygoing underground track with blue crystals shining everywhere, and maybe even an open ceiling revealing a stunning night sky. And then for the end, maybe you could even drive above ground for a short while, and it turns out that you're actually racing on a larger version of the Gateway Galaxy. It would still be pretty easy, focusing more on style than substance, but I think this would be a really nice way to get people hyped up for the rest of the game. Lastly, for the fourth track, we're gonna get a bit more dynamic, with a desert track, but not what you're typically used to. Most desert courses in Mario Kart tend to be based on either the Egyptian or American desert, and they're kind of oversaturated at this point. So how about an Australian-style desert? Pitch red sands, light vegetation, and perhaps a trek up the Allura mountain, before you glide back to the starting line. Maybe it could even be a spooky night track, with Goombaroos hopping around the map. Maybe even Swiftjar's spirit could loom over the track and summon meteors on lap 3. Actually scratch that part. But you get what I'm trying to say. A ghostly desert track set in Australia. I think that alone would be a neat concept. And I'm gonna call it Ominous Outback.
Wait, isn't that just a track you predicted in your Booster Course Pass videos?
Well, yes it is. How perceptive of you. Yeah, I'm gonna be reusing a lot of track ideas that I originally came up with when the Booster Course Pass was active. Because even if we didn't get any of those tracks that I theorized on, I'm still proud of those ideas, and there's no way to be accurate with these predictions anyways. But yeah, that's the Mushroom Cup finished. Next up is the Flower Cup. Like the previous one, this would be another more simple-oriented cup, albeit slightly more ambitious, since it is the second one. But not before we get through our obligatory Mario circuit. I don't really have too much to say on this one. Every Mario Kart game has had a Mario circuit in the Flower Cup, either as the first or second track, so I have a hard time thinking we'd be able to miss out on it. But perhaps it could still stand out in its own way. Most Mario circuit tracks tend to be more nature-oriented, as opposed to the starting tracks, which tend to be over-glorified Formula 1 loops. But how about this Mario circuit leans into both archetypes? A Formula 1 track, which also happens to be in the middle of a forest. That would be a bit more unique, even if it would still be generic. Next up, let's get back to more original ideas though. For the second slot, let's have another simple but spooky track. One course idea that I've been quite fixated on recently is a haunted farmland. Imagine a typical meadow, but with fog everywhere, an abandoned barn, and maybe even a small forest on the outskirts. Toss in a couple of booths and voila, that's Murky Meadows. Anyways, for the third track, I have an idea which I'm surprised Nintendo hasn't really done before. In Mario Kart 8, we had 2 different tracks based around an airport and a subway station each, and both were pretty creative. So the next step should be a track based off of a harbor. And no, Toad Harbor doesn't count. It was more just a regular coastal town. No, I mean a real harbor, like an actual seaport. You'd be driving through terminals, cargo ships, you name it. Heck, maybe even glide from one of those cranes. Again, this would be a track concept not seen before, and I think it would be a good way to hook up players even early on. So Nintendo, please make Seaside Terminal a reality for the next game. And following that, next, we get to the biggest storm in the game yet, for the 4th track. Introducing Deep Moray Trench, a course set in the deepest undersea trench there is, where light barely passes through, moray eels try to munch on you from the sides, and most importantly, there's an intense soundtrack. Perhaps something like Outer Space from Geometry Dash, or the Bloomsday Boss from Wario Land Shake It. It would be a chaotic finale to let people know that from now on, the game would only get more intense. And with that, the Flower Cup has now been finished. Now we move on to the 3rd cup, which is the Fruit Cup. Yeah, the Star Cup can wait a bit. If you watched my retro track prediction video, you probably already know why, but I'll mention it again if you haven't. See, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe had so many courses that I feel it would be kinda anticlimactic if we went back to the usual 32 tracks. But at the same time, I don't think we're getting 96 courses again. So we'll compromise, and that's why I propose that Nintendo will just add 2 additional cups to its base roster. One more retro and one more nitro. So this will be an intermediate warm-up before the real challenges. Starting off this cup, we have what is quite possibly the most bizarre track idea I've ever come up with. How should I put this? So, about 10 years ago, I once searched up Toad's Turnpike on Google. Pretty cool highway track. Except I forgot the K, so it became Toad's Turnpie. And that got me thinking, what if we got a track that was a highway inside an enormous apple pie? Like, imagine a typical road with cars, except the grass is a bunch of apple slices, and the ceiling was made up of those pie stripes, only letting sunlight barely pass through. Of course, you could also have a section that takes place outside of it, like on a kitchen table, but the important thing is, you drive inside an apple pie on a road avoiding cars. And that, my friends, is Apple Pie Way. Alright, the next track is a bit less peculiar. If you've watched my videos on Super Mario Bros. Wonder, you know how much I love that game, especially the Fungi Mines world. The idea of a mushroom forest with toxic swamps and abandoned ruins will never not be cool to me. So why not a track based on that? I think between all of the worlds in that game, this one would probably work the best as a course, as it's unique theming wise, and there's a lot of ways you could incorporate its unique gimmicks into a track. Like perhaps have a section where you drive across slime, but if you get hit by something, you sink down and have to take another path. That could be a really cool take on split routes. Similarly to how DS Bowser Castle handled it with the kebab wheel. And that's Mushroom Basin. I would be so happy if we got this. Now the 3rd track is actually the newest idea I came up with for this video. So we all know and hate Water Park. One of the coolest track concepts ever, completely wasted. So how about in the next game we get like an actually good theme park track? The idea I have in mind would include you driving on roller coaster rails, gliding past the drop down towers, as well as through carousels. Maybe we could even have a giant mech robot at one part, shooting bullet bills at you, a bit like the Airship Fortress beginning section. I'm gonna call the track, Green Thunder Ride. Yes, it's a Luigi track. I mean, come on, he deserves more than just some measly circuit tracks. And I can totally see him designing a park like this. He already has an engine room after all. Now for the final track of this cup, I had a maybe repetitive idea, but after a certain botching of a Booster Course Pass remake, I think this could be a based 180 on Nintendo's part. So the last time a Mario Kart game had 5 Nitro Cups, the last track in the new Middle Cup had a very interesting gimmick, where the course slowly turned from day to night. So let's do that again, but the other way, introducing Sunrise Step. On the surface, it's a pretty average savanna track where you drive up and down hills. You'd also have to avoid hoppos that make you bounce back, as well as bull rushes charging at you because Mario Wonder is great. It starts off as a night-themed track, but then as the race goes on, it slowly transitions to sunrise and lastly daytime on the final lap. Maybe even the angry sun could make an appearance and summon fireballs. That could be a really cool twist on expectations, and would leave the Fruit Cup on a satisfying note. And that's the third cup finished. To be honest, speaking for myself, this would probably be my favorite of these cups I'm predicting, if it were to become a reality, that is. But enough about that. Now, let's talk about the Star Cup. You know, it's kind of funny how even though the Star Cup isn't the last one, more often than not, it's usually much better than the Special Cup, at least in the most recent few games. So I'm gonna try to keep that trend alive. Opening up this Star Cup is our Wario track of the game. Ah, good old Wario. He always gets the best tracks, whether it's stadiums, gold mines, galleons, or even a mountain. Obviously, his next course should be in a prison. Yeah, I did just get this idea from Fantendo, but honestly, ever since I heard it, I couldn't help but think it would actually be kinda cool. On one hand, a prison track may seem a bit too dystopian for Mario Kart, but I mean, we already kinda have a prison in N64 Bowser Castle, and who's to say a prison track has to be dark? It could still be a bright and cheerful Mushroom Kingdom prison. You could drive past the detention cells, but also for a cafeteria, a football field, and maybe even through an escape route for the final section. There's a lot of ways this could work, and honestly, the idea of Wario owning a prison is just too funny. So please give us Wario Prison, Nintendo. For the second slot, we have the obligatory snow track. And here's another idea I had since the dawn of the Booster Course Pass. Basically, imagine Merry Mountain, but much more dynamic. You'd drive through a snowy village and up a mountain at night, and it would be Christmas themed, but you'd also drive inside a mountain, which would turn out to be a giant toy factory, with conveyor belts, presents to avoid, and maybe you could even exit out of it with a glider over the Arctic Ocean. And that is Festive Factory. Now, the third track of the Star Cup I believe would become an instant fan favorite, if it were to happen, that is. So this idea takes inspiration from mainly two pre-existing Mario levels. First, the painted swampland from New Super Mario Bros. U, and secondly, the Doodle Woods from Wario Land 4. On the surface, both are pretty unique 2D levels from their respective games, but what if the two could be combined for a racetrack? How about the course taking place in a forest made up entirely out of pencils and painting equipment? Not only that, but what if the track could have its own unique art style, reminiscent of Van Gogh's Starry Night? That could be so beautiful. In fact, I probably shouldn't even have come up with this, because now I'm gonna be disappointed when we don't get it. But I mean, hey, it's Nintendo. Either way, this would be one of the coolest tracks of all time. I can only hope that Painted Woodland becomes a reality. And that brings us to the final track of the Star Cup. Introducing Green Pipe City. On the surface, this would be a city high up in the blue sky, comprised entirely of warp pipes. But there's also a catch. See, the first two laps are the same, nothing too crazy besides driving in and on the pipes. But then on the final lap, a new path opens up, and you have to take a warp that leads to a higher floor of this town, where storms are ravaging, and the sky has become a more ominous purple. And when you reach the very end, you fight P.T. Piranha as a boss battle. So this is kind of a gimmick I want to see as a whole in the next game, but basically, boss battles would work the same way they do in Mario Kart DS's single-player mission mode. You toss items at the boss to deal damage, and once their meter hits the rock bottom, you can proceed to the finish line.
Okay, but this is versus race, which has more players. Do you just band together to take down the boss?
Actually, no. See, in some tracks of the Booster Course Pass, there are track elements that are only visible to certain players, depending on what lap they're on. And similarly, boss fights could also be personalized. For one character, say, the boss may be here, but nobody else can see it, because their boss is at a different spot. Granted, this would probably be very difficult for Nintendo to code in, and it might be a bit too gimmicky, but honestly, imagine how epic it would be. It would come especially as a surprise because up until this point, none of the other tracks would have changing laps or bosses.
Nah, Albert, this is way too convoluted for a Mario Kart game.
Oh, shut up, Bertel.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Maybe, but let me cope in peace. Anyways, that finally brings us to the Special Cup, the epic finale. Or at least that's what it's supposed to be. Before the dark times, before this shit. But I'm gonna try my best. I still want this Special Cup to be good after all. For the first track, we're gonna start off somewhat lightly. While Wario is busy running his prison and preventing inmates from escaping, Waluigi, his best friend, is running a tropical resort by a cove. This would kind of be the obligatory beach track, but it would be a bit more than that, since not only would it be night themed, but you'd also be driving inside a luxury hotel, through lobbies, a swimming hall, maybe even an outdoors restaurant. Why not even a small arcade section? Maybe the final lap could also be a bit dynamic, and have rain suddenly starting to pour down. That could be a cool first impression for the Special Cup, to let players know that we're only getting crazier from now on. And we're not stopping, as our next track pits us in Lunatic Lab, a course that takes you through a laboratory with a bunch of weird gadgets. Imagine there was a section where you would shrink, then you'd have to drive through a misty pipeline. And maybe there could also be another area where you drive across some spillage, and when you do, your whole control scheme gets inverted, so left becomes right. It would probably be very challenging, so I couldn't imagine it being more than just a short street away, but it would still be a cool twist this far into the game. Depending on how Nintendo would approach this concept, I think it could be another unexpected fan favorite, and would sit nicely as the last regular track, before the final showdowns. Which leads us to the final two tracks.
I sure wonder what those could be.
Bowser's Castle and Rainbow Road.
What?
Yeah, despite my preference for subverting expectations, I still have to be somewhat realistic, and there's no way a Mario Kart game wouldn't end with these two track types. Especially when even the Boosted Course Pass did it now. With that said, I hope they stand out more than usual though, because by Mario Kart 8 I was kinda getting bored by these. I think it would be really cool if the next Bowser's Castle would completely stray away from the typical lava theme, and instead opt for a castle in the sky. It could still have most of the same elements we're familiar with, like twomps and maybe even some traces of lava, but the main aesthetic would be a half-destroyed castle ruin, surrounded by ominous purple clouds. It would be an amazing nod to Super Mario 64's final level, and even that sky castle in New Super Mario Bros. Wii. In fact, why not even have another boss battle at the end of this track, like I mentioned for Green Pipe City? Like Big Bully. Obviously we can't do Bowser because it's playable, but still, it would really cement this track as the hardest challenge yet, before Rainbow Road. Speaking of, that lastly brings us to Rainbow Road. And I don't really have any ideas for it. Frankly, this archetype has far less potential left to be utilized in Bowser's Castle, since, let's be fair, you usually just drive on a rainbow in space. Sometimes there's also a moon or a space station, but otherwise there's not much else you can do with it. The only idea I have for it would be if maybe it took place entirely within a city. In the past, some rainbow roads have taken place above them, but this would be inside. You'd circle skyscrapers, glide over cityscapes, in fact, maybe even drive on streets colored like rainbows. Actually, that sounds underwhelming. I don't know, I don't have anything better. Otherwise, just make it a regular rainbow road. Maybe you guys have better ideas, let me know them down below. But yeah, overall, that concludes my predictions for the new courses that we could see in Mario Kart X.
Yeah, you're expecting way too much from Nintendo.
Whatever, just let's me be hopeful about my boss battles.
The game's called Mario Kart X, and yet you didn't predict Tesla Circuit?
Oh, not again! I don't want to hear any more Musk references. But yeah, overall that's gonna have to be it for this video. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and make sure to let me know what your predictions are down below as well. Follow me on Discord, Twitter, and Patreon for more updates, and I'll see you all soon. Until next time.